My son was lying in the ICU after a serious accident when my wife called me and said, "Tomorrow is my cousin's birthday party. Make sure you come help get things ready." I told her, "I can't. This is not the moment for that." She answered, "If you don't show up, I will file for divorce." I ended the call and deleted her number. On the day of the party, my son opened his eyes and said, "Dad, I got hurt because Mom." There are moments in life that rip your world apart, moments so gut-wrenching you question everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment started with a chilling phone call while my son lay fighting for his life in the ICU, and ended with a horrifying truth whispered from his hospital bed that changed everything. You see, I'd built my life on three non-negotiable principles: loyalty, family, and consequence. At 42, running my own private security firm, I'd learned to read people, to trust my gut. My size and my steely eyes might intimidate some, but those closest to me knew the fierce protectiveness that drove every single thing I did. I met Linda 12 years ago at my brother's wedding. She was the maid of honor, absolutely radiant, with that auburn hair and a laugh that pulled everyone in. A physical therapist, helping accident victims heal. That apparent compassion, that dedication to others, is what first drew me in. Our courtship was swift, intense. We were married in 8 months, a ceremony far grander than my practical nature would have chosen, but I wanted her happy. 2 years later, our son Mason was born, a bright-eyed boy with my analytical mind and his mother's quick wit. I built them a life most would envy. Our home in Riverside Hills had every luxury Linda desired. I encouraged her to leave physical therapy after Mason was born to pursue whatever made her happy. She took up tennis, joined the country club, and immersed herself in the suburban social scene. But over the last 2 years, things changed. Linda became distant, always on her phone, taking calls in private. She spent more time at the country club, often coming home late with elaborate excuses about charity events. Her affection toward both Mason and me cooled, replaced by a kind of irritated tolerance. My business instincts screamed warnings, but I silenced them. This was my wife, the mother of my child, the woman who'd promised forever. I chose to trust her rather than investigate. It was a mistake I'd soon regret more than anything. Then, the accident. A Tuesday evening in October. Mason, my brilliant 10-year-old boy who wanted to be a detective just like me, was riding his bike near our home when a speeding car hit him. The call shattered my world. Critical condition, emergency surgery. My hands trembled for the first time in years as I drove to the hospital, my mind spinning through every worst-case scenario. The doctors were grim. Severe head trauma, internal injuries. The next 48 hours were crucial. I called Linda immediately, over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. For nearly 24 hours, as Mason fought for his life through surgery after surgery, she didn't answer. It wasn't until the next evening that she finally showed up. She rushed into the ICU waiting room in a tennis outfit, her hair perfectly styled, not a trace of the frantic worry you'd expect from a mother whose child was hanging by a thread. Her explanation? A spa retreat with friends, no phone signal. It struck me as odd, but I was exhausted, terrified. I pushed the doubts aside. Now, on the third day, sitting by Mason's bed, watching the machines keep him alive, a cold dread settled in my chest. Linda had left that morning, claiming urgent matters at home. She'd barely touched Mason's hand, barely glanced at the monitors. Mason was all that mattered. Everything else, every doubt, every ignored warning, could wait. But deep down, I was compiling a list of questions that would soon demand answers. The breaking point came on the fourth day, as the hospital room dimmed with the fading afternoon light. Mason was still unconscious, but the doctors had mentioned signs of improvement. I was reading to him when my phone buzzed. It was Linda. Her voice carried that particular tone I'd come to recognize, the one where she wanted something and expected compliance. "How is he?" she asked, not waiting for a full answer. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something important." I looked at Mason's still form, the bandages, the IV lines. "I'm here with our son, Linda. Whatever it is can wait." No, it can't wait. Tomorrow is my cousin's Belle's birthday party. It's been planned for months, and I need you to help get things ready. The whole family will be there. Something inside me snapped. Are you serious right now? Don't take that tone with me. I know Mason is your priority, but life doesn't stop because of this. Belle specifically asked for you to handle the photography setup. You're so good with cameras. My voice dropped to a dangerous quiet, a tone anyone who knew me would recognize as a warning. Our son is in the ICU. He nearly died 3 days ago. He's still unconscious, and you're talking about a party? The doctor said he's stable now, and honestly, Vincent, you sitting there staring at him isn't going to make him wake up any faster. This family event is important to me. Belle has always been like a sister, and missing her 30th would be unforgivable. I closed my eyes, trying to process it. In 12 years, I'd seen Linda's selfishness, her need to be the center of attention, her talent for making every situation about her. But this was beyond anything. I can't, I said simply. This isn't the time. There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, calculating. Vincent, I'm not asking, I'm telling you. If you don't come tomorrow and help make this party perfect, I'll file for divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because of the threat itself, but because of the woman I'd married. Standing in that sterile hospital room, watching machines keep my son alive, I finally saw Linda with perfect clarity. She was threatening to end our marriage unless I abandoned our critically injured child for a party. Let me make sure I understand, I said, my voice carrying a deadly calm. You're threatening to end our marriage unless I leave our son's bedside to help you with party decorations? Don't be dramatic. He's sedated anyway. He won't even know you're gone. That was the moment, the precise instant when my love for Linda died completely, replaced by something far more dangerous. I built my career on reading people, on understanding their motivations, and in that moment, I finally understood exactly who Linda was. Without another word, I ended the call. Then, with deliberate precision, I deleted her number from my phone. I turned the device off entirely and put it in my jacket pocket. Whatever Linda chose to do next, whatever threats she made or actions she took, I was done. I pulled my chair closer to Mason's bed and took his small hand in mine. It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here. Daddy's not going anywhere. The next evening, as Linda was presumably celebrating at her cousin's party, I remained exactly where I belonged. I spent the day talking to Mason, reading his favorite books, and researching every detail of his treatment with the focused intensity that had made me successful in business. I'd also made some calls, not to Linda, but to contacts in my network, people who specialized in investigations, people who could find answers to questions I'd been too trusting to ask before. Because Vincent Morrison was many things, protective, ruthless when threatened, and absolutely relentless when someone harmed his family. But I was not, and never had been, a fool. I'd chosen to love and trust my wife, despite the warning signs. That choice was over now. The man who would emerge from this hospital room would be someone Linda never truly knew, and someone she would come to fear with every fiber of her being. Mason's eyes fluttered open on the 6th day as the morning sun cast golden rectangles across the hospital floor. I had been dozing in the uncomfortable chair when I heard a soft whisper, "Dad." I was instantly alert, my heart hammering. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." Mason's voice was weak, a little slurred, but his eyes were clear, focused. "The accident. I remember." "Don't worry about that now," I said gently, pressing the call button for the nurses. "You're safe. You're going to be okay." But Mason shook his head slightly, wincing. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Mom." Something in his tone made my blood run cold. "Mason, you don't need to. I got hurt because Mother told me to go to the store." Mason's words tumbled out in a rush, as if he had to get them out before he lost his courage. "Mom said she needed medicine for her headache, but she couldn't go because Uncle Trevor was coming over." The world tilted around me. Trevor, my own younger brother, Mason's uncle, my best man. Uncle Trevor? Mason nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I wasn't supposed to tell. Mom said it was our secret, that Uncle Trevor was helping her with a surprise for you. But Dad, they were kissing and touching each other, like married people do. The machines around Mason's bed faded into white noise as I processed what my son was telling me. Linda and Trevor, my wife and my brother. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Mom sent me to get medicine so they could be alone, Mason continued, his young voice carrying a guilt that no child should bear. I was supposed to take the bike path, but I was upset and took the shortcut through the street instead. That's when the car hit me. My hands clenched into fists, but my voice remained gentle for my son's sake. Mason, listen to me carefully. None of it is your fault. Do you understand? Mason nodded, but I could see the weight he was carrying. I heard them talking before I left. Uncle Trevor was mad about something, said he was tired of hiding. Mom was crying and saying she needed more time. The final pieces clicked into place in my mind with crystal clarity. Linda's distance, her mysterious phone calls, her lengthy absences, her complete lack of emotional response to Mason's accident, that spa retreat excuse that never quite made sense, and now the ultimate insult, threatening divorce if I didn't abandon our injured son to help her maintain appearances at a family gathering. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Wells. I stepped back, giving them space. My mind raced far beyond the hospital room. Remarkable recovery, Dr. Wells murmured. The swelling has reduced, cognitive responses are excellent. We'll keep him for observation, but this is very encouraging. I nodded, managing a weak smile for Mason's benefit. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The protective father was still there, but he was now joined by something far more dangerous. A man who'd been betrayed by the two people he'd trusted most in the world. After Dr. Wells left and Mason drifted back to sleep, I walked to the window. 3 stories below, my black Mercedes sat, the same car I'd driven frantically to the hospital 6 days ago, when I still believed my world was intact. My phone, silent for 2 days, showed 17 missed calls from Linda and 4 from Trevor. I scrolled past them all without listening. Then I found a name I hadn't called in over a year, Anthony Russo, a private investigator who specialized in discretion and thoroughness. Russo Investigations? Anthony, it's Vincent Morrison. I need to hire you for something personal. Vincent, of course. What do you need? Complete surveillance and background on 2 subjects: financial records, communications, travel patterns, everything. I want to know what they've been doing, where they've been going, and who they've been talking to for the past year. Understood. Who are the subjects? I watched my reflection in the window glass, noting the cold determination in my own eyes. My wife, Linda Morrison, and my brother, Trevor Morrison. There was a pause. Anthony knew this wasn't a request made lightly. How deep do you want me to go? All the way to the bottom, Anthony. No limits, no boundaries. I want to know everything. You'll have preliminary findings within 48 hours. I ended the call and returned to Mason's bedside. My son was sleeping peacefully, color already returning to his cheeks. Whatever came next, I would make sure Mason was protected from all of it. But Linda and Trevor, they would face the full consequences of their choices. I'd built my reputation on understanding that every action had repercussions, and betrayal carried the highest price of all. The war was about to begin, and I intended to win completely. Anthony Russo's preliminary report arrived exactly 48 hours later, an encrypted email to my secure business account. I read it in the hospital cafeteria during one of Mason's rest periods. What I discovered made my blood turn to ice. The affair between Linda and Trevor had been going on for 14 months. Anthony had uncovered credit card records showing shared hotel visits, joint trips disguised as separate business travel, and hundreds of text messages between burner phones. But the details that cut deepest were personal ones: intimate photos, love letters, and planning documents for what they'd apparently started calling their real life together. More damaging still were Trevor's financial records. My brother had been systematically embezzling from our family construction business, the company our father had built and left to both of us. Trevor had been siphoning money into offshore accounts, apparently planning to disappear with Linda once they'd accumulated enough to start fresh somewhere else. But the revelation that made my jaw clench with fury was a recorded phone conversation Anthony had obtained from 3 weeks ago. Linda's voice was crystal clear. Once Vincent finds out about us, he'll probably try to take Mason away. We need to be prepared for that. Maybe it would be better if something happened to eliminate the custody issue entirely. Trevor's response had been just as chilling. You mean something permanent? I'm just saying accidents happen, especially to little boys who don't watch where they're going. I had to step outside the hospital to process what I'd just read. My wife and brother hadn't just betrayed me, they potentially orchestrated our own son's near-death experience. The accident that had nearly killed Mason might not have been an accident at all. I called Anthony immediately. I need surveillance recordings from the intersection where Mason was hit, traffic cameras, security footage from nearby businesses, everything. Already working on it. Should have those files by tomorrow. And Anthony, expand the investigation. I want to know everything about both of them. Debts, associates, weaknesses, everything that could be useful. I spent the next 2 days maintaining perfect normalcy on the surface while building my case underneath. I continued caring for Mason, who was recovering remarkably well and would be discharged within the week. To any observer, I appeared to be nothing more than a devoted father, focused entirely on his son's health. But during Mason's sleeping hours and therapy sessions, I was meeting with lawyers, accountants, and other specialists. I consulted with Detective Ray Castellano, a former police investigator who now works private cases for my security firm. Ray specialized in building airtight cases. You want to be very careful here, Ray warned me during our meeting at a downtown diner. If you're right about them orchestrating the accident, we're talking about attempted murder of a child. That's not something you handle privately. I'm not interested in letting the courts handle this, Ray. I want them destroyed completely, but I want it done in a way that looks like natural consequences. Ray studied my face. We'd worked together for 8 years, and he'd never seen this level of cold determination. What exactly are you planning? Trevor's been stealing from the family business. That stops now, and he pays back everything with interest. Linda wants a divorce. She'll get one, but she'll walk away with nothing. And if they did engineer Mason's accident, my voice dropped to a whisper that sounded more threatening than any shout. Then they'll understand what real consequences look like. The traffic camera footage arrived that evening. What it revealed confirmed my worst suspicions. The car that had struck Mason hadn't speeding by accident. The driver had actually accelerated towards the crosswalk. More damning still, a license plate search revealed the vehicle was registered to a shell company that traced back to one of Trevor's business associates. I now had proof of attempted murder. But instead of taking the evidence to the police, I began planning something far more comprehensive. I spent the night drafting what I privately called the Trevor Protocol, a systematic plan to strip my brother of everything he valued, while exposing his crimes in the most publicly humiliating way possible. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 would target Trevor's finances and reputation within our shared business community. Phase 2 would destroy his relationship with Linda by revealing the extent of his criminal activities to her. Phase 3 would be the final reckoning, a confrontation that would leave Trevor with nothing but the knowledge that his own actions had caused his downfall. For Linda, I had something even more personal in mind. She wanted to play games with our marriage. I would show her exactly what happened when someone tried to manipulate a man who understood power better than she ever could. On Mason's final day in the hospital, Linda finally appeared for what she claimed would be a family discussion. She arrived wearing a new designer dress and jewelry I didn't recognize, her manner combining false concern for Mason with barely concealed irritation at my continued silence. "We need to talk about us," she announced after giving Mason a perfunctory kiss on the forehead.
This silent treatment is childish. There is no us anymore, Linda. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. File for divorce whenever you want. My lawyer will be in touch with the settlement terms. Linda's eyes flashed with triumph, clearly believing she'd won. Good. I was hoping you'd be reasonable about this. Oh, I'm going to be very reasonable, I agreed, smiling in a way that didn't reach my eyes. You'll find me extremely reasonable. As Linda left the hospital that afternoon, confident in her victory, she had no idea that Vincent Morrison had just declared war, and in war, I had never lost a single battle. I spent Mason's first week home establishing the perfect facade of a man resigned to his fate. I hired Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, a highly recommended private nurse, to help with Mason's recovery while I handled the divorce proceedings. To Linda, I appeared defeated, going through the motions with bitter acceptance. What Linda didn't know was that Mrs. Fitzgerald had previously worked security for my firm and was documenting everything that happened in our home. Every conversation, every visitor, every phone call Linda made was being recorded through sophisticated surveillance equipment I'd installed throughout the house. The recordings
From just the first 3 days were devastating. Linda had invited Trevor over within hours of my supposedly giving up, and their conversations revealed the full scope of their plans. They discussed selling the house immediately, moving the offshore money to untraceable accounts, and starting fresh in Costa Rica, where they believed I couldn't touch them. But more damning were the details about Mason's accident. In a moment of drunken confidence, Trevor had boasted about how easy it had been to arrange. Your boy getting hurt was the perfect excuse for Vincent to be out of the picture, he'd said. And if he'd been hurt worse, well, single mothers get a lot more sympathy than divorced wives. I listened to that recording 3 times, my hands steady despite the rage building inside me. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd tried to murder my son for convenience. Whatever happened next, they had earned every moment of suffering I was about to deliver. The first phase of my plan launched during the second week. Trevor arrived at the Morrison construction offices Monday morning to find the locks changed and federal investigators waiting with a search warrant. I had provided them with detailed financial records showing the embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraud Trevor had been committing for over a year. I don't understand, Trevor called me, panic clear in his voice. Why would you turn me in? We're family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from our father's company, I replied calmly. The FBI is very interested in your offshore accounts, by the way. Turns out hiding money from the IRS is still illegal. While Trevor scrambled to find lawyers, I was already implementing Phase 2. I arranged for Linda to receive copies of Trevor's arrest records, his financial crimes documentation, and most importantly, recordings of Trevor bragging about having other women in 3 different cities. Linda's call came within an hour of receiving the package. Vincent, we need to talk. Something terrible has happened with Trevor. I know all about Trevor, I said simply. I've known for weeks. There was silence on the line. Then Linda's voice came back, smaller, more uncertain. What do you mean? I mean, I know about the affair. I know about the embezzlement. I know about the accident. Each word delivered with surgical precision. I know everything, Linda. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and my brother have been planning to destroy my family, steal my money, and move to Costa Rica. Unfortunately for both of you, I'm much better at this than you are. I could hear Linda's breathing becoming rapid, panicked. What do you want? I want you to pack a suitcase and be out of my house by noon tomorrow. The divorce papers will grant you exactly what you deserve. Nothing. You can keep whatever you can fit in that suitcase. You can't do this. I have rights. You had rights when you were my wife. You gave those up when you decided to have my son nearly killed for your convenience. My voice remained calm, but the words carried the weight of absolute finality. Noon tomorrow, Linda. Don't be late. The next morning, I watched from Mason's bedroom window as Linda loaded 2 suitcases into her car. Her face was streaked with tears and fury. She kept looking up at the house, clearly hoping I would change my mind or come outside to negotiate. I didn't. Mason, propped up in bed reading, looked up at me. Is Mom really leaving forever? Yes, she is. Are you sad? I considered the question carefully. Was I sad? The man who'd loved Linda Hartwell was sad, but that man had died in a hospital room a week ago. The man who'd taken his place felt only cold satisfaction at seeing justice served. Nobody, I'm not sad. People who hurt our family don't get to stay in our family. Mason nodded seriously, wise beyond his 10 years. Like Uncle Trevor? Exactly like Uncle Trevor. That afternoon, I received a call from Detective Castellano. Trevor Morrison posted bail 2 hours ago. Word is he's been trying to contact Linda, but she's not answering her phone. She's probably figured out that he's been lying to her about everything else, too, I observed. What's his next move likely to be? My guess, Ray said, he's going to come looking for you. Men like your brother don't go down quietly, especially when they think they've been betrayed. I smiled grimly. Good, I've been waiting for him to make that mistake, because phase 3 of my plan required Trevor to come to me, and when he did, I would be ready to finish what my brother started the day he decided that harming a child was an acceptable price for his greed. The final confrontation was coming, and Vincent Morrison intended to win it permanently. Trevor Morrison made his predictable move on a Thursday evening, just as I had calculated he would. Desperate, facing federal charges, and abandoned by Linda, he came to the family home looking for someone to blame for his downfall. I had been expecting him. Mrs. Fitzgerald had taken Mason to his grandmother's house for a sleepover, leaving me alone to handle what was coming. The security system captured Trevor's arrival, drunk, angry, and carrying what appeared to be a baseball bat from his truck. I watched through the monitors as he stumbled up the front walkway, muttering to himself. The external microphones picked up fragments. Ruined everything. My own brother. Should have finished the job. When Trevor started pounding on the front door, I was ready. Vincent, open this door. We need to settle this like men. I opened the door calmly, noting Trevor's bloodshot eyes and the reek of alcohol. My younger brother had always been the volatile one, quick to anger and slow to think. That predictability had made planning this confrontation remarkably simple. Hello, Trevor. You look terrible. You son of a bitch. Trevor raised the bat, but I was faster, stepping aside as his drunken swing left him off balance. I caught his wrist and twisted, sending the bat clattering across the entryway floor. That was a mistake, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Trevor stumbled backward, suddenly realizing he'd badly miscalculated. I'd always been the bigger, stronger brother, but Trevor had forgotten that my security work kept me in peak physical condition. You destroyed my life. Trevor shouted. Linda was the best thing that ever happened to me, and you? I didn't do anything to your life, Trevor. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided to steal from our father's company. I advanced slowly, backing Trevor towards the living room. I just made sure there were consequences. The money was as much mine as yours. The money you stole wasn't from the business profits, Trevor. You've been embezzling from client accounts, money that belonged to other people, people who trusted us. My voice carried cold contempt. Our father built this company with integrity, and you turned it into your personal piggy bank. Trevor's face flushed with rage and shame. Dad always liked you better anyway. You got everything handed to you while I had to scrape for whatever. Linda understood that. Linda understood that you were a useful idiot with access to money, I interrupted. She's been playing you for 14 months, Trevor. Every promise she made, every plan you thought you two had together, it was all manipulation. I pulled out my phone and played one of the recorded conversations from the previous week. Linda's voice filled the room. Trevor's so desperate to prove himself that he'll do anything I suggest, the money laundering, the offshore accounts, even arranging the accident. He actually thinks I respect him for it. Trevor's face went white as he heard his lover's words. You doctored that. You're lying. I played another recording, this one from just 3 days ago. I never loved Trevor. How could I? He's weak, criminal, and honestly, not very bright. But he was useful for getting Vincent out of the picture. Once the divorce is final and I have my settlement, I'll disappear and let Trevor deal with his legal problems alone. Trevor sank into a chair, the fight going out of him as he realized the full scope of how thoroughly he'd been used. She said she loved me. She said we were going to start over together.
"She used you to steal money and try to kill my son," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences for that? The accident was her idea. I just arranged the car. I never wanted Mason to actually get hurt that badly." I went very still. "You just confessed to attempted murder." Trevor looked up, sudden panic in his eyes as he realized what he just admitted. "Vincent, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I pulled out my phone again, this time showing Trevor that our entire conversation had been recorded. "I understand that you and Linda conspired to have my 10-year-old son killed for money." Trevor tried to stand, but I was already moving. Years of protection work had taught me how to restrain dangerous individuals efficiently and permanently. Trevor found himself face down on the hardwood floor with my knee pressed against his spine. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, calmly, ignoring Trevor's struggles. "You're going to prison for embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion, and attempted murder."
You'll serve 15 to 20 years if you're lucky. You can't prove the murder attempt. I have recordings of you confessing. I have financial records of you paying the driver. I have traffic camera footage of the accident. And now I have you confessing again on tape. I applied slightly more pressure, and Trevor gasped. "I can prove everything." I stood up, leaving Trevor gasping on the floor. "But here's the thing, Trevor. Prison is just the beginning. You tried to kill my son, and that means you've made an enemy who will never, ever forget." "What do you mean?" I smiled, and Trevor finally understood the true danger he was in. This wasn't the protective older brother he'd grown up with. This was someone far more dangerous, a man with resources, connections, and an absolute commitment to revenge. "I mean that for the rest of your life, wherever you go, whatever you try to build, I'll be there to tear it down. Every job you apply for, every relationship you start, every moment of peace you think you found, I'll be there to remind the world exactly what you are." Trevor tried to crawl away, but I caught his ankle. "And Trevor, Linda's going to face the same justice. She's already discovered that all her credit cards have been canceled, her bank accounts frozen, and her passport flagged. She's trapped, alone, and about to learn what happens to people who threaten my family." As I called the police to report an intruder who'd confessed to attempted murder, Trevor Morrison finally understood that he'd declared war on the wrong man, and this war was about to end with his complete and permanent destruction. The next 3 weeks unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated. Trevor was denied bail after the recording of his confession was presented to the court, and Linda found herself trapped in a legal nightmare that stripped away every advantage she'd thought she possessed. My lawyer, Rebecca Cross, was a specialist in high-stakes divorce cases who took particular satisfaction in destroying manipulative spouses. She'd reviewed all my evidence and constructed a legal strategy that would leave Linda with nothing, while ensuring she faced criminal charges for her role in Mason's attempted murder. "She's trying to claim she was coerced by Trevor," Rebecca informed me during our meeting. "Her attorney is arguing that she was a victim of manipulation and had no real involvement in the criminal conspiracy." I smiled coldly. "Show them the recordings from last Tuesday." Rebecca played the audio file I had provided, Linda's conversation with a man named Carlos Mendez, whom she'd been secretly meeting while supposedly devastated about her marriage's end. In the recording, Linda was clearly planning to access hidden assets and flee the country once the heat died down. "I love how she thought she was so clever," Rebecca observed, trying to play the victim while secretly planning her escape. "The prosecution is going to have a field day with this." Linda's attempts to claim innocence collapsed when faced with the overwhelming evidence I had accumulated. The recordings of her planning Mason's accident, her knowledge of Trevor's embezzlement, and her attempts to hide assets all painted a picture of a woman who was far from the victim she claimed to be. But my revenge went deeper than just legal consequences. I'd used my network of contacts to ensure that Linda's reputation was destroyed throughout their entire social circle. The country club expelled her for moral turpitude. Her closest friends received anonymous packages containing transcripts of her most damning recorded conversations. Every bridge she'd ever built was systematically burned. The coup de grace came when I arranged for Linda's own family to learn the truth about her character. Her cousin, Belle, the same cousin whose birthday party had triggered Linda's divorce threat, received copies of recordings where Linda mocked Belle as a pathetic spinster who throws elaborate parties because she has no real life. Within a week, Linda found herself completely isolated, facing serious criminal charges and financially destitute. Her desperate attempts to contact me for mercy were unanswered. I was focused entirely on Mason's continued recovery and the rebuilding of our lives. My son was thriving, both physically and emotionally, and he'd shown remarkable resilience. "Dad, do you think Uncle Trevor is sorry for what he did?" Mason asked one evening as we worked on a puzzle together. I considered the question carefully. "I think Trevor is sorry he got caught, buddy, but being sorry you got caught is different from being sorry you hurt someone." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "Like when kids at school say sorry, but they don't really mean it." Exactly like that. "I'm glad he's gone," Mason said quietly, "and I'm glad Mom is gone too. They made everything feel scared and angry all the time." I felt a surge of protective love for my son. Despite everything Mason had endured, he was becoming a stronger, more perceptive child. The trauma hadn't broken him, it had revealed his inner strength. The final courtroom scenes played out with devastating efficiency. Trevor was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to murder. The judge specifically noted the calculated cruelty of targeting a child for financial gain. Linda received 12 years for conspiracy and accessory charges, though I suspected she'd serve the full sentence. Prison had a way of being particularly harsh to people who harmed children, and word had a way of spreading about what inmates were inside for. As I watched them both being led away in shackles, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a cold sense of completion. Justice had been served, consequences had been delivered, and the threats to my family had been permanently eliminated. But Trevor made one final mistake. As he was being escorted from the courtroom, he looked directly at me and mouthed words that the security cameras would later clearly capture. "This isn't over." I smiled then, the first genuine emotion I'd shown in months, because Trevor still didn't understand who he was dealing with. Even from prison, Trevor apparently thought he could continue to threaten my family. That night, I made a call to contacts who specialized in ensuring that prison could be a very educational experience for inmates who needed to learn important lessons about consequences. Trevor Morrison would discover that my reach extended far beyond the courtroom.
The natural consequences of your choices. People know what I did to Mason. They know about the accident. Of course they do. Attempted child murder is public record. I'm not responsible for how other inmates react to that information. Trevor was crying now, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "I'll do anything. I'll sign over everything. I'll admit to whatever you want. Just please." "Trevor, you already confessed to everything on tape. You already signed over everything when the court seized your assets. There's nothing left for you to offer me." "Then what do you want?" My voice dropped to the quiet, dangerous tone Trevor had learned to fear. "I want you to serve every single day of your sentence, knowing that you tried to murder my son for money. I want you to wake up every morning and go to sleep every night, remembering that your greed and weakness nearly killed a 10-year-old boy." "Vincent, please!" "And I want you to understand that when you're eventually released, you'll be a registered felon with no money, no family, no friends, and no future. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you destroyed everything good you ever had for a woman who never respected you and money you were too stupid to enjoy." The line went dead, and Trevor Morrison finally understood that his war with me had been over before it started. He'd brought a knife to a gunfight, and I had spent months ensuring that the defeat would be permanent and complete. In her own facility, Linda received a similar call that same day. Her conversation with me lasted exactly 90 seconds and ended with her screaming threats and obscenities into a disconnected phone line. That night, both Trevor and Linda learned that threatening Vincent Morrison's family, even from prison, carried additional consequences. The next morning, they were both transferred to maximum security facilities, where communication with the outside world became almost impossible. I set down my phone and returned to helping Mason with his homework. My son was excelling in his new school, making friends easily and showing no signs of lasting trauma. "Dad, was that Uncle Trevor on the phone?" Mason asked without looking up from his math problems. "Yes, it was. Did he say he was sorry?" I considered the question. He said the words, but they didn't mean anything. Some people only say sorry when they want something, not because they actually feel bad about what they did. Mason nodded seriously. "I'm glad we don't have to see him anymore." "You never will," I assured him. "Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt." 2 years after the trials, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Mason play basketball in the backyard with his best friend, Jake. At 12, Mason had grown tall and strong, with no physical limitations from his injuries, and a maturity that impressed every adult who met him. The house was smaller than our previous home, but it felt infinitely more peaceful. I had chosen the location carefully, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who valued privacy. I'd also implemented security measures that were invisible but comprehensive, ensuring that Mason would always be safe without feeling like he lived in a fortress. Dr. Sarah Chun, Mason's therapist, had pronounced him remarkably well-adjusted during our final session the previous month. "He's processed the trauma in a very healthy way," she told me. "Children are often more resilient than we expect, especially when they have a strong support system." I had built that support system carefully. Mrs. Fitzgerald had become like family, serving as both caregiver and confidant for Mason. My mother had moved closer and spent several days a week with her grandson. A circle of trusted friends and neighbors provided additional layers of security and normalcy. The construction business had been rebuilt from the ground up, under my sole control. All of Trevor's contamination had been methodically removed, and the company now operated with an integrity that would have made our father proud. I had hired Detective Ray Castellano as head of security, and the business had expanded into corporate consulting with impressive success. But the most significant change was in me. The man who had emerged from the hospital ICU 2 years ago was harder than the man who had entered it, but he was also more focused on what truly mattered. I'd learned to distinguish between people who deserved my trust and those who merely demanded it. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Detective Ray Castellano holding a manila envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," Ray said, stepping into the house. I opened the envelope and found photographs from federal prison surveillance cameras. Trevor looked haggard and thin, his face bearing scars that suggested his imprisonment had been exactly as educational as I had intended. In the photos, he was being transferred to another facility, this time a minimum security prison farm in a remote location. He's been reclassified as a model prisoner. Apparently, he's found religion and spends most of his time in the prison library. I studied the photos without emotion. How much time does he have left? 8 years, assuming good behavior. Linda has about 7 left on her sentence. I nodded and placed the photos back in the envelope. Any word on their post-release plans? Trevor's been writing letters to his old army buddies talking about starting fresh somewhere far away. Linda's apparently planning to move in with her sister in Oregon once she's released. Both of them seem to understand that returning to this area would be inadvisable. Good. I sealed the envelope and handed it back to Ray. "File this with the others. I don't need to see any more updates unless they try to make contact." Ray understood. I had moved beyond the need for ongoing revenge into the more important work of building a secure future for my son. The past was settled. What mattered now was ensuring that the future remained protected. That evening, as I helped Mason with his algebra homework, my son looked up with a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Dad, was that Uncle Trevor on the phone?" Mason asked without looking up from his math problems. "Yes, it was." "Did he say he was sorry?" I considered the question. He said the words, but they didn't mean anything. Some people only say sorry when they want something, not because they actually feel bad about what they did. Mason nodded seriously. "I'm glad we don't have to see him anymore." "You never will," I assured him. "Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt." 2 years after the trials, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Mason play basketball in the backyard with his best friend, Jake. At 12, Mason had grown tall and strong, with no physical limitations from his injuries, and a maturity that impressed every adult who met him. The house was smaller than our previous home, but it felt infinitely more peaceful. I had chosen the location carefully, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who valued privacy.
I'd also implemented security measures that were invisible but comprehensive, ensuring that Mason would always be safe without feeling like he lived in a fortress. Dr. Sarah Chun, Mason's therapist, had pronounced him remarkably well-adjusted during our final session the previous month. He's processed the trauma in a very healthy way, she told me. Children are often more resilient than we expect, especially when they have a strong support system. I had built that support system carefully. Mrs. Fitzgerald had become like family, serving as both caregiver and confidant for Mason. My mother had moved closer and spent several days a week with her grandson. A circle of trusted friends and neighbors provided additional layers of security and normalcy. The construction business had been rebuilt from the ground up, under my sole control. All of Trevor's contamination had been methodically removed, and the company now operated with an integrity that would have made our father proud. I had hired Detective Ray Castellano as head of security, and the business had expanded into corporate consulting with impressive success. But the most significant change was in me. The man who had emerged from the hospital ICU 2 years ago was harder than the man who had entered it, but he was also more focused on what truly mattered. I'd learned to distinguish between people who deserved my trust and those who merely demanded it. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Detective Ray Castellano holding a manila envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," Ray said, stepping into the house. I opened the envelope and found photographs from federal prison surveillance cameras. Trevor looked haggard and thin, his face bearing scars that suggested his imprisonment had been exactly as educational as I had intended. In the photos, he was being transferred to another facility, this time a minimum security prison farm in a remote location. He's been reclassified as a model prisoner. Apparently, he's found religion and spends most of his time in the prison library. I studied the photos without emotion. How much time does he have left? 8 years, assuming good behavior. Linda has about 7 left on her sentence. I nodded and placed the photos back in the envelope. Any word on their post-release plans? Trevor's been writing letters to his old army buddies talking about starting fresh somewhere far away. Linda's apparently planning to move in with her sister in Oregon once she's released. Both of them seem to understand that returning to this area would be inadvisable. Good. I sealed the envelope and handed it back to Ray. File this with the others. I don't need to see any more updates unless they try to make contact. Ray understood. I had moved beyond the need for ongoing revenge into the more important work of building a secure future for my son. The past was settled. What mattered now was ensuring that the future remained protected. That evening, as I helped Mason with his algebra homework, my son looked up with a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Dad, was that Uncle Trevor on the phone?" Mason asked without looking up from his math problems. "Yes, it was. Did he say he was sorry?" I considered the question. He said the words, but they didn't mean anything. Some people only say sorry when they want something, not because they actually feel bad about what they did. Mason nodded seriously. "I'm glad we don't have to see him anymore." "You never will," I assured him. "Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt." 2 years after the trials, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Mason play basketball in the backyard with his best friend, Jake. At 12, Mason had grown tall and strong, with no physical limitations from his injuries, and a maturity that impressed every adult who met him. The house was smaller than our previous home, but it felt infinitely more peaceful. I had chosen the location carefully, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who valued privacy. I'd also